Falcom recently announced the next entry in the Kiseki franchise, Kai no Kiseki, via an official press release on their website. And while the press release itself is sparse, there is still a lot to talk about, especially given the current state of the franchise in Japan after the first two Kuro no Kiseki titles, or Trails Through Daybreak as it's called in the West. First things first, let's read the brief and check out the screenshots, then we'll take a look at the game's title and its implications. Alright, so here we have the official press release. We have the title, Eiyu Densetsu, Kai no Kiseki, Farewell O Zemuria, and then we have the press briefing right here. However, I do know that much of my audience does not speak Japanese, so I did bring up Gematsu's translation of it, and I can confirm they did a very good job, so we'll go ahead and use this for our reading. And the brief reads as such: in the year 12OX, everything comes to an end. C. Epstein, the father of the Orbital Revolution, prophesies the end of the Zemurian continent. As X Day approaches, a massive orbital rocket is about to be launched from the large military base built in the Kunlun Range. Can man make it past the planet's atmosphere? What lies at the end of the continent? Will mankind be able to uncover the true nature of the world? While the whole world watches to witness the largest undertaking since the dawn of history, somewhere in the singularity that is Ored, forces from all over the land were about to gather, including a young Spriggan. Will the single trail toward the distant heavens ultimately shape the future of Zemuria, or... And then the brief goes on to say that the Trails series has sold over 7.5 million copies worldwide and is acclaimed for its elaborate world building and epic storyline, and that the story of the Zemurian continent, which began with the Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky, and has continued through Trails from Zero, Trails to Azure, Trails of Cold Steel, Trails into Reverie, and Trails Through Daybreak, is set to take a dramatic turn in the 20th anniversary title, The Legend of Heroes Kai no Kiseki, Farewell O Zemuria. Moving on to the screenshots, we have the first one here, which shows a young woman standing at what is most likely Calvard's Kunlun Range military base. We can actually see the rocket in the background. As for who this girl actually is, she's most likely Hermes from Kuro no Kiseki 1 and 2. Hermes was the motorcycle driver who never took off her helmet and worked as a sort of delivery person for, the shadier parts of town. She also acted as a shop for you that you could use at night. Her hairstyle is the same as Hermes's, and going by what we did learn about her in Kuro 2 and her military background, and then her jacket in this photo, it would be reasonable to assume that she is part of Calvard's Air Force, which seems to be in charge of their space program as well. Moving on to the second screenshot, we see a mech floating above the planet, implying that either we will be going to space in Kai no Kiseki, or at the very least some scenes will take place there. As for the mech itself, this is almost certainly a modified version of the new mechs that Calvard is developing that they showed off at the end of Kuro 1. There was actually dialogue mentioning how they could be modified for different environments after all. Now this third screenshot is very interesting. Obviously we have the Grand Master, indicating that she will be making an appearance in some capacity. But more so than that is the area in which she is standing. Behind her we can see a gate-like structure on top of a raised platform, and both of these look almost identical to the gates and platforms found in Kuro 2's bonus dungeon. But then there's the environment surrounding her, which is very reminiscent of environments seen in Nayuta no Kiseki. I bring this up because there's a very popular theory going around the Japanese community that Nayuta is actually related to the mainline Kiseki series and not just a spin-off title. I won't get into the details here, but if you do play Nayuta, you'll see why pretty quickly. Now this fourth screenshot shows a man with his back to the viewer as he looks off into the distance, and from his dialogue, he appears to be talking to someone. And while his identity is obviously being hidden here, we can reasonably deduce that this is Rufus from both his dialogue and his hairstyle. In Kuro 2, we got to see a silhouette of Rufus, which is how we can see the similarities in hairstyle, and in the dialogue he is saying that he is a person that shouldn't exist anymore, and suggesting to whoever he is talking to that due to this, it would be to their advantage to essentially use him as a tool until he breaks, for lack of a better word, which sounds a lot like something the current Rufus would say. Screenshot number 5 confirms that Brigard will be returning after being absent for Kuro 2, and that Campanella will also be making a return. We can also see from their dialogue that the two have a history together, with Brigard mentioning how Campanella hasn't changed in the years since they last met. And for the final screenshot, we get a look at the ruins of a destroyed town. Now this is most likely Kureu Village from Kuro no Kiseki 1, as the architecture and the chapel-looking building in the background are pretty similar. Though I must say I was expecting it to look even worse than it does given the structural integrity of the village's buildings and the fact that the nuke went off in the very center of it, but maybe this has something to do with the unexpected lack of radiation we were told about in Kuro 1. If that is the case, it would explain the person you can barely see standing in the middle of the village off in the background, who, given the white clothes, could be Latoya Hamilton investigating the scene for its oddities. Either way, that does it for all the screenshots. So that's the basis for the next entry in the Kiseki series. We've heard about the prophesized end of the Zemurian continent already, we also already know that Calvard is working towards space travel, and we know about the many forces who are gathering alongside Vaughn and his companions. But the three lines, can man make it past the planet's atmosphere, what lies at the end of the continent, and will mankind be unable to uncover the true nature of the world, are interesting as they can be interpreted as breaking the shackles of the goddess, a concept that has been brought up numerous times before by various characters in the series. Then there is the confirmation of Ored being a singularity, something that was hinted at but not yet confirmed. This is important due to how shady the Marduk company is, especially given what transpired during Reverie and how that could relate to the Marduk company's technological prowess, their timing and rise to power, and basically everything to do with Reset. All I'm saying is that when Thorndike says that all the technology from Reverie Singularity was lost, I just find it really hard to believe him. The dude is super sus. Either way, it's looking like the Kiseki series will now be entering the final stages of its story with Kai no Kiseki, which actually brings us to the game's title. Now, the Kiseki series is known in Japan for having titles that use one character and its reading to convey the game's meaning. This doesn't always come through well in the localizations though, especially when the localization completely botches a title like they did with Reverie, but regardless, these titles are supposed to have pretty significant meanings, and Kai no Kiseki is no exception. The choice of using the kanji for Kai most likely infers two meanings. The first being Sekai, or world, inferring that the story will be closing in on, or even outright answering, many of the questions about the world of the Kiseki series that remain a mystery. And the second meaning being Kyokai, or boundary, referring to the fact that the Calvard arc, and the story as a whole, are looking to move into space. Then there's the subtitle of Farewell O Zemuria that has the obvious meaning of just saying goodbye to Zemuria, though I can't help but think that the choice of using O Zemuria instead of just Zemuria has some significant meaning, even if I'm not sure what that significance is at this time. One thing I found really interesting about the title though is that despite it being the third entry into the Calvard arc, they chose not to title this game Kuro no Kiseki 3. This could be because they are positioning this third entry to more closely resemble Reverie in terms of scope and importance to the overall narrative, or it could be because much of the game may take place in Ored, or even space, rather than actually in Calvard. Regardless of what the full reasoning is, much of the Japanese community, and I'm in this camp as well, believes that at least some part of their reasoning for not calling the game Kuro no Kiseki 3 has to do with Falcom wanting to distance themselves from the Kuro title as quickly as possible, given the negative reception and poor sales of both games so far. Either way, Kai no Kiseki will be releasing in fall of 2024, and going by Falcom's very predictable track record for releases, this means that we will most likely be seeing this game at the end of September. Post-editing Roz here. So, after I had basically fully completed the video, a friend of mine in Japan let me know that an interview with Kondo was published in the latest issue of Famitsu. If you're curious about the issue, I put a picture of it up on the screen. Anyways, in the interview, Kondo went over some clarifications and provided extra context about Kai no Kiseki. However, rather than completely redo my video from scratch, I just decided to add this little section at the end. First things first, Kondo provided a reasoning for why the third game in the Calvard arc is being named Kai no Kiseki rather than Kuro no Kiseki 3. And that reason is that the story will not just be contained within Calvard, but will encompass the entire central and western parts of Zemuria. Now, this doesn't mean we'll be traveling all over the place. Most likely, the story will be contained to Calvard, Ored, and maybe one other area. But when it comes to the story, Kondo did clarify in the interview that many of the mysteries that have been unresolved so far will be answered in Kai no Kiseki. And I believe this is what Kondo means when he says that the story will encompass the entire central and western parts of Zemuria. Rather than us traveling there, we'll probably just be covering all the unanswered story threads in those areas in addition to everything that's been happening in Calvard. I also believe that while the reasoning he provided for the title change certainly does make sense, the poor reception of Kuro 1 and 2 almost certainly played a role, though they would never actually admit that publicly, so it's still just conjecture. Kondo also clarified that Kai no Kiseki is in fact the third title in the Calvard trilogy, and not a separate title, and that because of this, while many other characters will be making an appearance, the main character will still be Vaughn. The final bit of information that may provide some hope for you Kevin fans is that when specifically asked about Kevin and whether he would be returning or not, Kondo did decline to answer yes or no, but did state that the Dominion will be playing an important role in Kai's story. So there is hope. And that'll do it for this news video on the next entry in the Kiseki franchise. If you like this video and want to see more like it, let me know by leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Also, if you have any questions about this video, the Kiseki series as a whole, or any other game that I cover, feel free to hit me up over on Twitch at twitch.tv/RosalindGaming or my Discord server, both of which are linked in the video description below. Until next time, take care.